Hi, everyone. Today I'm excited to have with us Becca Puglisi. Becca, is that how you say your name?
That's it.
But oh, I did say it right.
Perfect.
Good. She used to be an elementary school teacher before becoming a fiction author and a co-author with Angela Ackerman of quite a few descriptive resources for writers, including the best-selling Emotion Thesaurus, a writer's guide to character expression, which has helped me tons, I must say. So,
Oh,
and her and Angela also have started the really helpful website onestopforwriters.com. And so I'm just so excited to have you on the podcast today, Becca. Thanks for being here.
I'm very excited. This is my first ever podcast, by the way.
Oh, awesome.
So super excited. I was a little nervous, but then when you sent me the questions, I was like, oh my gosh, this is all the stuff I love to talk about. And like, I don't ever get to. So yay.
Awesome. So it's kind of like doing, a recorded workshop.
That's right. Yes. And I've done plenty of those. So
Yeah.
this is, no problem.
Yeah,
No problem.
exactly. Oh, that's so great. Well, would you just start by sharing a little of your story, like your background and what inspired you to be a writer, and then later to help writers through your books and websites.
Well, it's very weird because I have no history as a writer. I mean, all the writers are like, "Oh, I wrote my first story when I was 4," and it never crossed my mind to write a book. It's kind of a weird story. I was newly married. My husband was selling insurance. I was teaching private school. We were so poor. We had no money. And there was this thing at our church, and they were raising money for a mission opportunity. I felt really bad because I didn't have any extra money. And so I prayed and I said, God, how can I make some money? And God said, write a book. And in hindsight, that is completely ridiculous. I mean, if I knew then what I know now about the lucrative nature of being an author, I would have thought, oh, that doesn't help me. But I thought, okay, well, I'll write a book. So I sat down and I did a little research and I wrote a middle grade and it was terrible. But I just loved it. I mean, I seemed to have kind of a knack for it and picked it up really fast and just went from there. That was the first time I had ever written anything more than, stuff at school. So that was when I started. And I mean, ironically, I didn't make a penny for 8 years, you know how that is. But I joined the critique circle and I started critiquing other people's work and getting my work critiqued by people and growing in that way. And that's where I met Angela. She had started at the same time, joined at the same time. And despite there being like thousands of people on this site, we found each other, loved each other's work. And so we were critique partners for a while. And then 4 years later, I was going to take a break because I had gotten pregnant. I was going to have my first child and I wanted to be a mom and focus on that. And Angela called me and said, I want to start a blog and I don't want to do it by myself. I think you should do it with me. And I was like, what? This is totally not the right time. But again, I mean, this is the way that my writing career and our career together has gone. It's never the right time. It's never a convenient time to do any of the things that have come up. I realized we need a writing presence, an online presence, if we're going to be writers. And it's so much easier to do it with someone else. So
Yes.
we started our blog and we started with the Emotion Thesaurus. We started doing one emotion each week. And, everybody was just like rabid about it. I mean, they just loved it and they wanted it to be in a book. And when are you going to put it in a book? And I was like, dude, I have like small children. There's no way I can do this right now. And once again, we just realized we started finding like PDFs of our Emotion Thesaurus like around the internet. We're like, wait, we didn't do that. Where did that come from? And we realized we have to do this before somebody else does.
Yeah.
So we, with a 1 and a 3-year-old at home, I published with Angela this book, and you asked about the what inspired us to kind of go at it from a helping other writers perspective, and we were just both so uncomfortable with the full court press marketing strategy, that so many people have with buy my book, buy my book, buy my book, and that just doesn't come naturally to us. And so we thought, why don't we approach it differently? Why don't we do what we are comfortable with and approach it from a standpoint of how can we help people? What can we, yes, we'll tell them about our book, but let's give them something too. Let's give them exposure. Let's give them craft books, whatever it was. Every launch, every contest we've done has been some element of paying it forward, just because that was what was kind of easy for us and made sense for us. So that's kind of how we got where we are now.
Oh, that's great. And I love your, your guys' website, writershelpingwriters.net. I mean, it's just, there are so many helpful, blog posts on there.
Mm.
I often go there, when I'm writing, I'll just, and now, of course, now I go to One Stop for Writers too, right?
Oh, good.
Yes,
Good.
but to find descriptions and stuff, as you're writing, it's just like, how would I say that again? And so then
Right.
so I mean, kudos to you guys. I mean, it's just awesome what you guys have done there.
Oh, thanks. It's been a real journey. It's been pretty cool to see.
Yeah. No, that's really great. So, you've been creating more. I see on One Stop for Writers, you've been creating more thesauruses, and that writers can refer to help, amp up. And the one you have out right now is so awesome. Like the one emotions that amps up the emotions of your characters. So, would you just talk about that book, Emotion Amplifiers? And your descriptions of words like how would a writer describe something like addiction, attraction, pain, stress? I mean, that's been super helpful for me because I'm often at a loss for words. So would you just talk about that and how that helps writers?
Sure. The emotion amplifiers started as part of the emotion thesaurus. When we were doing it initially on the blog, we were just kind of throwing out all of these different emotions and writing them up. And then when it came time to publish the book, we realized, well, some of these aren't actually emotions, like boredom, exhaustion, inebriation. I mean, these are things that you feel, but they're not actual feelings. They're not emotions. So we took them out of the emotion thesaurus publication. But when we started looking at them, we're like, they all kind of had something in common in that they are like states of being, if you will, that if you put your character into that state, it's going to stress them out. It's going to make them really prone to poor choices and, having to think when they're not at their best,
Yeah.
which can accomplish a lot of things in your story. So we decided, okay, well, we could maybe call these emotion amplifiers because that's kind of what they do. If a character is already feeling sad and you add in exhaustion or you add in uh, hunger or illness or stress, all of those things are going to they're going to make their feelings even more strong, and they're going to make them more volatile, so that you have a couple of different things that happen. We tell people to use the amplifiers when you want to increase tension. If you have kind of a scene where there's not a whole lot going on and you need to ramp things up for your character,
Yeah.
then make sure you incorporate one of those in there, and it's going to just elevate the tension already because the character is going to be feeling so much more
Yeah.
when you add that in. And also if you want to add conflict, because like I mentioned, these things make decision making more difficult. When you are very hungry, when you are extremely cold or overheated or sick, you are not thinking at your best. And so you're very likely with your character, if you have them in a decision making situation where you really want them to make the wrong decision, to complicate things, and that they're not the kind of person who would really make the wrong decision, if you add one of these in, then it is more realistic, and it just rings true to the readers that they would go kind of the wrong way when they are stressed out or when they're having to deal with all of these other things that are going on at the same time. So that's really what we see as the purpose of the emotion amplifiers, is that you can build them in to your story so that it's creating a situation where a certain can happen more realistically.
Yeah. Now I often refer back to that book. I mean, all your guys' books I refer back to.
Oh, good.
As I'm writing, right? It's like a
Yeah.
great reference. Yeah. And so and that's really really useful to help writers everywhere know show don't tell, right? And
Yep.
so trying to describe, right, to get the descriptions right so that the showing is more real is sometimes challenging, but I mean, your books really help with that. So,
Well, good. And I've always said that telling is a lot easier. It's less words, it's less work, it's less time.
yeah.
But telling is just relaying information. It's not taking the reader on a journey. It's not stimulating their senses in any way
Yeah.
and feeling like they're part of the story. And that's really what we want. And, the emotion thesaurus, we did cover that a lot in the front matter, just kind of explaining and breaking that down a little bit. Because like you said, show, don't tell, show, don't tell. I mean, we hear it all the time. It's like
Yeah.
the first 5 of the writer's 10 commandments. I mean, show, don't tell. But when you're starting out, nobody really explains it. They just tell you, oh, you're telling here, you need to be showing this. And I remember that was the first light bulb moment I had as a writer, when somebody in that critique group said to me, this whole first page is really telling, and you really need to show, and let me show you how. And she kind of just rewrote it or rephrased it and showed me the difference. And it was like it clicked, and I could see there was a demarcation from my writing before that point and my writing after that point. So the show, it's so, so, so important. And that's why we dedicated the whole Emotion Thesaurus is basically all about how to show our characters' emotions, just because it's so important to get that right.
Yeah, it is. Well, and it draws, as a reader, you're drawn in. You feel like almost like you're living the life of the main character.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
So, yeah. Yeah, that's really good. So, on sort of, I mean, continuing with emotions, but maybe in a different way, on your blog, writershelpingwriters.net, you've written many posts on different emotional wounds entry. And the latest one that I read was the death of a child on one's watch. And so, I mean, you guys, that's just awesome. You write about the difficult topics, right? It's hard to talk about. It's hard to write about. It's like it's hard to read about.
Yeah.
But this is life, right? And when we're writing stories, this is. I mean, I love reading tearjerkers myself, right? I love and often, life. Obviously, life will, we will have some of these emotional wounds entry in our own life, right? And so, why would it be important to understand, as you're writing your character's backstory and the difficult woundings that they've gone through, and how does knowing these emotional wounds help tell more meaningful stories?
They're really hard to write, those entries, because we know there are people reading who have experienced some of them, and you definitely want to be sensitive, and you don't want to assume that everything this person has gone through. You always feel like, you're going to miss the mark somehow, and you don't want to dredge up old, memories and painful memories. But they're so important to knowing your character. I've done a whole presentation on this, so I could go on forever and ever, because it's really, really important. And the basis of it is based in human psychology. And that this is the kind of the process that happens with real people. And so if we apply it to our characters, then we end up with these really realistic characters. That there's this, very often times we have experienced, I'll talk from the perspective of characters instead of people, just to keep it clear. Okay. Your character has in their past an event, some kind of traumatic event that has a profoundly negative impact, and it creates these negative emotions. And it's so painful that they don't want to go through that again. They don't want to experience that event or feel those feelings again. So they often will, a lie will surface in their psyche based on this wound, because after something really bad happens, we have this tendency to try to rationalize it, try to figure out, why did it happen? What could I have done to stop it? And we have this tendency to internalize everything and to blame ourselves when bad things happen that are totally not our fault. It's like, kids, when their parents get divorced, they always think that it was them, that it was something that they did. Yeah. Something in us makes us do that. So when something happens to your character and they're in that process of trying to kind of deal with it and process it, they very often end up blaming themselves, and they end up believing something that is not true about themselves. I mean, let's say you have a guy whose fiance is shot in a convenience store robbery that goes wrong, and he was there, and he sees himself as the protector. That's kind of his role, and he failed. Well, he may start to believe that he cannot protect the ones that he loves. And that's a lie. It's not true. I mean, this is something that was completely random, and very likely, if it happened again, he would be able to do something differently. But that's a lie that he starts to believe. And as we know, when we tell ourselves, even subconsciously, lies over and over and over, we start to believe them as being truth. And so out of that lie, different character traits form as a means of protecting ourselves so that we don't have to experience those feelings or that event. We're going to keep it from happening again. the guy in the convenience store, he may withdraw. He may become very withdrawn from the people in his life, because if he distances himself, then he's no longer going to have to be responsible for them, and then he won't have to go through all those feelings if something bad happens again. He may become very superficial and kind of surface, to keep from having to get to know people and get into the position where he may have to be responsible again. He may become promiscuous, because this is a way that he can maintain some kind of intimacy without developing these deep relationships.
Yes.
Positive things too. He very well could become very alert, very observant about his surroundings, because he doesn't want something like this to sneak up on him again. He may become very cautious, taking measures, to make sure that he's safe. So good and bad, when this wound happens, these new character traits form that are meant to protect us. But the flaws that form, the negative traits, they're very often, even though we see them as kind of being a good thing because they're protecting us, they really keep the characters back. They hold them back from being able to be the person that they were meant to be. And this is often ties into the character arc for your current story, because you have this thing that happened in the past and it created this person who is now in your story, and they have to overcome that flaw in order to be the truest version of themselves, in order to be truly fulfilled. And that's the character arc through the story. So the wounding event is like crucial, because you have to know what it is so that you know what the character has to overcome in order to be successful. And, they don't have to be these big explosive events like the one that I use. A lot of times they're very subtle. They're things that happen over and over. Like if you as a child had a workaholic parent who was constantly blowing you off for work, making promises that they then broke, not showing up to recitals and soccer games and all of that. Over time, those little things happening are going to create a wound, that you want to avoid feeling that way again. Yeah. So they can be big, and they can be really subtle and quiet. But they all have this impact on who your character is in the story today. And that's why it's super important to know what wounding event is in your character's past. And that's why we're doing this thesaurus, just because there are so many possibilities, and what's interesting is that they can affect characters totally differently. The same wounding event could have a really devastating impact on one character, and then, not really affect them too badly, affect a different character very badly. I did one on infertility, because that's something that I had struggled with, and one on miscarriages, which I had a miscarriage also, but it didn't really have a big impact on me.
Okay.
But I knew how devastating it is for so many other people. So you have to know your character in order to really be able to write them realistically and consistently in a way that is going to draw readers in, because that consistency it's hugely important for reader engagement. I mean, the minute you write something that your character would not normally do, I mean, the reader goes, what? I don't understand, and draws them right out. So we have to make sure that we know our characters so well, so that we can write them realistically. That's why I think the wounds are super important.
Yes. I just thought of something as you were talking about, you were saying it affects the same emotional wound affects different characters differently. Do you think, is it because of personality? Like, say someone who is, really bold and feisty, and maybe, it would affect them differently than someone who's quiet and maybe shyer and more introverted. And do you think that's part
Absolutely.
of it?
I think personality is a huge part of it. I think a lot of it too, there's so many factors. The support system that people have,
Yes.
That's going to impact hugely how they respond to given traumas. Their emotional range, if they're kind of they're kind of fragile and quiet with their emotions and not really responding in a big way, they may not have a big response. But somebody who wears their heart on their sleeve and is, you always know what they're feeling. I mean, they're going to have these big responses. So many different things can affect what the events happening to your character, how it's going to impact them. And I do think personality is a huge part of it, as well as background, upbringing, and again, the support system that's there if there is one.
Yeah. Wow. So there is a lot to really think about. But I guess maybe that's why it's good to really know each of your characters' backstory, right? That's kind of
Right.
to know in detail, right?
Exactly. And people like backstory gets to be like the 4-letter word because you're always told, to keep it out of the story because it's boring and it slows the pace. And I mean, that is true to a certain degree, but there's this meme out there with the iceberg and it's got the huge iceberg and the little water line. And you only see like, this much of the iceberg up top. And it
Yeah.
says backstory. This is what the reader sees. And then all the rest of that is what the author knows.
Yeah.
Backstory is really more for the author than it is for the reader, because we need to know all that stuff in order to really understand who our character is in our story, what they're going to do in a given situation, how they're going to respond to stimuli. And the reader only sees, that the little bits that are necessary. It is super important for the author to know as much as you can.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and you can tell, right? When you're just as a reader, even, right? When you're reading a book, like you were saying, the consistency of the character throughout, or how deep maybe even
Exactly.
the author has gone with the meanings behind things,
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The more backstory you have, the more layered, you can make that character and give them so much more depth than just the stereotypical kind of archetypes that we see over and over again in
Yeah.
books. That is where the layering and the depth comes in, is through knowing all of that backstory and being able to weave that in. Definitely important.
So, would you talk about I found your reverse backstory tool. How can writers use that to help them craft better stories? Because we're talking about backstory, right? And
Yep. I love this tool because it takes all of kind of takes all of the things that have happened and what happens because of those events, and it paints this picture of who your character is. And it looks like this. I don't know if it's
yeah.
like a spreadsheet.
Yeah, yeah,
And
I
it's
can see it.
got all these bubbles that you can fill in, and they kind of connect. But you can start anywhere. This is what's so cool. Let's say you have a character and you know who your character is today. Like their main flaws or their main attributes, but you need to work backwards because you don't know why they are the way they are. So you can fill in on this sheet. There's a bubble for flaws that are working against the character. Painful emotions that these flaws help the character to avoid feeling. So you can go from there. And then what traumatic life event changed how the character views the world and himself? That's the wound. So you kind of just work your way through it. Oh, well, why would my character be really stubborn? I have one here for Katniss that I did. Why would she be stubborn? Why would she have authority issues? These are her main flaws.
Yeah.
Well, the wound for her was her dad's death and her mom's mental breakdown all happening at the same time, where she had to then take over
Yeah.
the caring for the family at such a young age. And then the next bubble says, what lie does the character believe about himself? That only she can protect and care for herself and her sister, that the buck stops with her. There is no one else. No one else can do that. So it's just this really cool tool that kind of, you can start anywhere. You can start with where your character is today, or maybe you're a plot driven person and you don't really know your character that well. You just know that this important event happened in the past. Well, you can start with that wounding event and work from there. What lie came out of that? What flaws were born out of that? Now, what is the outer motivation? What are they trying to accomplish throughout the story? You can start in all of these different places and kind of fill in the gaps so that you have this really great outline of all the kind of the important stuff that you need to know overall for your character in the story. I really love its versatility, that you can kind of start at any point of the process.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been working through it as I've, doing the backstory of my new stuff, my new book.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's just really helpful. That's why I appreciate that, you talking about it, because I think it'll help other writers. They can find that on your website, right?
Yeah, we have a tools page that has a blank copy of this that you can print out, and it has a whole bunch of all the appendixes that we have in our books where they have worksheets are on that page at our website, so you can print them out. They're all downloadable.
Oh, okay, awesome. Yeah. This is so interesting, talking about some more tips that writers can use in your with using your books, positive and
Mhm.
negative thesaurus. So what are some tips that you have how to write engaging and deeper character descriptions? I guess we kind of touched on that a bit, but using specifically the positive and negative traits thesaurus.
Yeah, well, you can't write engaging descriptions until you know your character super
Yeah.
well. So you have to get that down. And let's say that you have a character who is efficient. That's like their defining trait. And so I've got my positive trait source here. And you go to the efficient page,
Yeah.
and it's got all of these things that can help you figure out how to show that character's trait, how to show that they are efficient without coming right out and saying it. Because, like we talked about, the showing is so important because
Yeah.
it pulls readers in and engages them. So I have on the efficient page, there's a field for possible causes. So you think, okay, well, why is my character this way? Well, one of them is growing up in a busy, active family. Maybe my character had, 7 siblings and everything was always super chaotic and he hated that. And so
Yeah.
now he wants to, become more efficient and streamline his life. And that's why he has become the way he is. Having a type A personality. Maybe it's just he was born that way. I mean, he came out of the womb that way.
Yeah.
That's the way that he is. But that field really helps to kind of flesh out possible reasons why, so that it's not just a random trait that you've assigned. And that's something that I want to kind of narrow in on, is that that's the way I used to do my characters, where I would just kind of pull traits that I liked or traits that were admirable, and I really wanted my character to be this way, but it didn't make sense altogether. We have to be a little more deliberate about it. And that's where these books really come in handy. Then you have a whole field for associated behaviors, things that a person who is efficient might do. So it gives you kind of it's like a brainstorming list that you read through it and you think, oh, he would do that, but he's, a little bit different. He would probably do it this way. And so you can really personalize them to match your character. Multitasking well, delegating tasks to others, being highly focused, getting straight to the point. These are all just different things that, as a general overview, as who an efficient person would be. So you just have a feel for how to write him and how he would respond in all of these different situations you're going to have in your story. And then there's the coolest part, I think, to this book is that we have positive aspects of the trait and then negative aspects. Because you think, well, efficiency is a positive. I mean, it's an attribute, and it's a good thing. But there are good and bad parts to every character trait. We know that it's positive, but in the negative, it says characters with this trait can grow frustrated with people who are not speedy and proficient. I mean, this is my husband, by the way. I wrote this whole thing with my husband in mind. Friends who don't work as quickly might bristle under an efficient character's impatience or annoyance. These characters are focused on finishing, and they don't pay close attention to detail, end up sacrificing quality for time. So again, it's just another way of adding depth. If you have this character who's efficient and everything is all only about the positive side, it's not really realistic, and it's not going to read quite as true to readers. But if you can bring in the negative side of that character trait too, then, and put in a couple of, and you're kind of at that point building around, if efficiency is his main character trait, you want to bring in other traits that make sense with that. Maybe he is impatient because he is so efficient. That makes sense to have that as a flaw for him. So it's just a way to help you kind of build the character in a way that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is we have challenging scenarios for the efficient character. So you have kind of ways to give you ideas for how to complicate things, how to make things difficult for him. So that's kind of how I use this book in the character building process, but also I've done it a lot of times after the fact. Like if I've written a book and I realize at the end that my character needs a little work, then I can go back and see, what do I need to add in? What did I miss? And that's how both the negative trait and the positive trait books have kind of helped to get to know the characters. And then it gives you really good kind of solid ideas of how to write the character well in your story and get those descriptions just spot on. And there's a lot of good content too in the front matter, especially the negative trait goes into all of the wounding and how that works, the wounding event and the lie that builds. And it talks about villains and how, you need to have kind of a general idea too of your villain's backstory and why they are the way they are, instead of just putting him out there and him just being evil for no reason. Lots of really good information on how the negative traits form, how positive traits form in the front matter.
Yeah.
So, yeah, very proud of those 2 books. Those were like, oh my gosh, it took so much research, because we're not psychologists, we're not therapists, we don't know, claim to be any expert on that. And so it took a lot of time reading, and we had them vetted by actual real therapists and psychologists because we were so nervous, about getting it wrong. But the response has been really, really positive to those.
Oh, you both did such a great job with those books. I mean, it's just, yeah, it's just awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah. So just kind of moving on, this is, I mean, this is related to all the thesauruses because, at your website, onestopforwriters.com, you have many other, I've really been helped with that by looking through the thesauruses there, like references, it's like a helpful reference guide for writers. So far, I was looking at one example, and you had a setting thesaurus, and I don't have any books on the Arctic tundra, but I clicked on that, and it's just great how you have listed, sights and sounds and smells, tastes, textures, and sensations, and you even add on to that. You say here are the possible sources of conflict. Here's people commonly found in this setting. And then you also have setting notes and tips, just super helpful. So why is it important to know all of these details, for instance, about a setting in a story?
I don't think that with the setting you have to know everything. I think the important thing with the setting is that it's one of the most underutilized tools I think that we have as authors. That the setting can do so much, and yet we typically think of it as just the time and the place. Like we just have to show the reader where they are, and that's it. But the setting can accomplish so much more, and that's what we are trying to put together with the setting thesaurus. First of all, as we talked about, showing, it's so much more effective than telling, and a large part of showing is engaging the senses. Because, as I mentioned, if I'm just telling you, relaying information to you about the setting, you're going to be sitting back as the reader and just listening and not participating. Yeah. But if I can draw you in and get you through the viewpoint character to hear what they're hearing and feel what they're feeling, smell what they're smelling, then the reader is going to feel like they are right there, and they are going to be drawn into the story and kind of walking that path with the reader. So the senses, engaging all of the senses, is so, so important when it comes to the setting. And that's why we included, what does it sound like? What does it look like? What does it taste like? All of the setting, all of the senses in there. We know that as writers ourselves, there's so many settings that we would like to include, but we can't get there ourselves, like the Arctic tundra, or, a place where we may have been, like summer camp. I mean, I went to summer camp 40 years ago, 30 years ago, but didn't, can't go back and don't really have good recall. So that's why we put, we're going to be publishing those books in June. So they're going to actually be books. And there's over 200 settings, so that we were trying to give people this big variety, to pull from. But that's why it's important to know the senses, so that you can write it in a way that's not totally visual, so that you're drawing people in. But the setting is also a really great vehicle for conflict, because in any setting, there are just natural things that could come up that will cause conflict. Be that through the actual person that's there, that the people that are there, or through the environment itself. I mean, I have one here for a children's birthday party. I mean, you think, please, what kind of conflict is there at a children's birthday party? It's all happy. But so many things, children being injured, allergic reactions to food, kids fighting over toys, bullying, spoiled kids, a car being dented or dinged by a stray ball, parents upset by goings-on at the party, gossipy parents, a collapsing bounce house. I mean, just all these things that you could throw in to add that conflict and ramp things up. Because, as you know, every scene has to have conflict. It has to have something happening that is blocking the character from getting what they want out of that scene.
Yeah.
So settings are a great vehicle for conflict. And so often, again, we just don't think about using the setting. We're always thinking in terms of the antagonist. Well, the antagonist is the one who's causing the conflict because he's blocking. But there's all these other things that happen on a scene level. And we can totally use the setting to make that happen. So that's another way that the setting can be used. You can reinforce emotion with the setting. You can create mood. You can create tension and conflict, show the passage of time, foreshadow, hint at backstory. All of those things you can do while you're showing the reader what the scene looks like. Yeah. It's just such a versatile element of writing. And that's why we've gotten so excited about these books, because you just don't think of the setting that way. It's kind of you think of it as background.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be just background. It can totally do double duty. And that's why we've included all of those. We also have in the books, but not at One Stop, although we may be adding that down the road. I can't remember what our plan is for that. We have a descriptive example for each setting where we take some of the techniques that are covered in the front matter and we write just a paragraph using that setting to do some of these things, to either hint at backstory or to build mood, to kind of show authors how you can use those things with the setting to create these different effects.
Yes. Wow. So I didn't know that there was so much, with the setting that really, I use setting, but I don't think I use it to the point, like, to really, as far as much description as you were talking about. I'm looking forward to reading your setting thesaurus, because it's going to take writing to a whole new level.
Well, and that's why we did the setting. Our pattern is that we do a blog, we do a thesaurus at our blog at Writers Helping Writers, and then after a while we stop that one and we start a new one, and we kind of gauge by reader interest the ones that we want to turn into books, because obviously not all of them are going to do as well in book form. And the setting was one that people really responded to. So we started thinking, okay, well, how can we started researching the setting and how you can use it and what more can it do than just set the scene, and just all of these different things came up that we were like, holy mackerel. I mean, I never knew before writing the book that some of this stuff could be accomplished. So super excited about that. I think that's going to kind of be an eye-opener, I hope, for a lot of writers, and really give them another tool to just amp up their description and help it to do more with less.
I also noticed at One Stop for Writers, you're talking about thesauruses like color and pattern, symbolism and motif, texture, weather and earthly phenomenon. And how would writers use these different things to make their story, I guess, just really more exciting for readers?
Yeah, it's all of our thesauruses are meant to help writers enhance their story. Things like symbolism, adding that in can be really effective. And with the symbolism thesaurus, we just have a bunch of common themes broken out, and then you click on the one that you might want for your story, and it tells you different things that you could use to symbolize that theme. So that one is pretty straightforward. The one that's really interesting to me is the color one. Is colors, patterns, and textures. And we noticed in our writing, as where most of our thesauruses come from, is because we notice, wow, I'm having this problem. Maybe this is a common problem. Maybe we should make a thesaurus about it.
That's great.
Is that we would have, like, if you have something blue, we're always using the same things to describe what color blue it is. Robin's egg blue, it's the sky blue, the ocean blue. And so we wanted to come up with a list that gives you as many things as possible that is that color, so that if you want to make a comparison, you can do that in kind of a fresh way that makes sense for your character. If you were looking at orange, maybe your character has an orange scarf, and you're trying to figure out a good way to describe that scarf other than saying it was orange. If you look at that entry at One Stop, it has light, medium, and dark shades. If you wanted to go with something humorous, maybe you're poking fun at your character, or it's a silly kind of a character. I mean, you could use it's orangutan fur. I mean, that's that color orange.
Oh, yeah.
Or a fake tan. It's that orangey fake tan color, the color of her scarf. If you have somebody who's more like innocent and kind and soft. Maybe she's from the South. You could say that it was the color of a peach or the color of a persimmon or a mango. If you have someone who's a little harder around the edges, it's the color of prison coveralls. It's hot coals. There's a tabby cat on there, and I thought, oh, what if it was a feral cat? You know, if this is a really harsh person, and you're trying to get that across,
Yeah.
maybe, you know, that kind of person wouldn't be wearing a scarf. So maybe you would change it to something that is symbolic of her, that she wields, you know, like a weapon that she hurts people with. Maybe it's a briefcase, and she's kind of a power player. Maybe the briefcase is made of alligator hide, and it's orange like the feral cat that used to hang out at the convenience store and attack anybody who came by. I mean, that's just one way that you can, instead of saying her scarf was orange, you know, you can do so much more if you just dig a little bit deeper and look at your character and the kind of character that you have. With all of these thesauruses, that's really what they're about. It's about going a little bit farther than the first thing that comes to mind, the first idea that you get for describing, and making it really personable and unique to your character so that you end up with a really fresh description for whatever it is that you're trying to do.
Yes. Well, and that's really what makes, novels come alive, I think.
Right. Absolutely. It's
Yeah.
that I have this goofy thing that I do with, I have a little notebook, and whenever I'm reading and I see someone has said something that I've seen before, but it's in a totally new way, you know, I get all excited and nerdy about it, and I write it down in this little notebook. But then as I'm writing myself later and I'm trying to think of, I really want to write this my own way and not say it the same way everybody else has said it, I can go back and look, well, how did she say that? What did she, kind of break it apart? How did she flip it around? What did she change about it to make it different? And that's really what we want. We want, as you said, our writing to be unique and to be individual and to not sound like everybody else's, but to sound like us and to match our characters.
Yeah.
So that's really what all of our thesauruses are meant to do, is to kind of give authors a brain start boost, to just kind of get them thinking about different ways that they could write these different things.
Yes. Oh, super helpful. So, okay. So, now, I didn't really have this one question on the list, but just reminded me because, you write YA fantasy and historical fiction. So would you talk about your own books and how you have, how has this helped you when you're, with all the thesauruses you've written and all the ideas you've gotten? How has this helped you write your books?
Um, it's been interesting because we obviously have less time for fiction writing now, more time for nonfiction writing. But we have each tried to carry on in different ways with our fiction. And I did my own nano last year or the year before, I can't remember. I can't do it in November because we have Thanksgiving here and my son's birthday is in November. It's just a terrible month.
Yeah.
So I did it in January. I just did all my planning, and I told Angela, hold down the fort because I'm going to be a WOL for next month. And it was really awesome because I was totally able to use the thesaurus books. That was kind of a weakness that I had always had. My characters, like I said, were kind of just a hodgepodge of stuff that I thought was cool and didn't really make sense, didn't really fit together. And I used the negative trait books to build my characters and to build, to a smaller degree, the surrounding cast, so that they are conflicting, they're contrasting a little bit. Matching where they need to match, but really rubbing each other wrong, in important ways. And I ended up, for the first time, with characters that were just really, they just made sense. They rang true. For the first time, I finished the manuscript and didn't have all these gaping holes with my character that I had to then go back and say, oh crap, well, I need to do this, and this wasn't quite right.
Yeah.
The Emotion Thesaurus, I'm constantly using that one. Just so helpful. And it's different with us because we've kind of internalized everything. We've spent so much time writing all of the material that we don't actually need to use too much of the front matter, especially. But I use the color one all the time. use the symbolism one. I think is really cool for coming up with symbols. It's helped so much. It's like taking, a master class where instead of somebody else telling you about it, you're finding all of it out on your own.
Yeah.
It's really, really helped a lot. It's been really cool.
Your fiction books, are they under your name?
They actually aren't published.
Oh,
None of my
okay.
fiction ones are published.
Okay.
I actually, again, we were so kind of green when we started that I've learned so much through writing these books that when I do continue with my next book, I feel like it's just going to be leaps ahead, of where the other ones were. Your writing does go through those stages where you can see how it's grown.
Yeah. Oh, that's
So
awesome.
those are not done yet. And I don't have time to publish them now if I could, with everything else that's going on. It's just going to have to wait. We talk about that a lot. Like, what happened to the fiction writing? This is how we got started.
It'll come. Yes, it'll come.
That's right.
So, with all the writers that are listening and, they've, I'm sure they've been super helped by all that you've said about the thesauruses and One Stop for Writers. But, a lot of them, at least, the ones that have connected with me have said that, they struggle with some kind of fear or self-doubt. Have you experienced that in your writing?
Yeah. Mostly more with my aspects of my career than with my actual writing. But yeah, I'm always finding myself being thrust into new situations that are outside of my comfort zone. Like today, I was very nervous leading up to this because, again, it's my very first one. The first time I spoke at a conference, self-publishing a book. Please, I didn't know anything. Angela and I were both, figuring out as we went. But I do have some advice that has really helped me. I struggled for thankfully a very brief time with a panic disorder shortly after my first child was born. And something that I learned from my therapist who helped me to kind of work through that was that most of the time when we have these fears, fear has its place. It's meant to help us survive, to alert us to danger, things like that. But most of our fears are really unfounded and overblown. Yeah. And they're based many times on a lie that we are believing that is not really true. I will never be good enough to be published, or I can't write in this stage of life that I'm in right now. I just can't do it right now. It's going to have to wait. Or I can't write this genre or this story or this character. And once you can identify what the lie is that you're believing and replace it with the truth, then you can move past it. I dealt with this after my son was born. I had taken a break, and then I thought, okay, I'm ready to get back into it. And I just had the hardest time, actually starting the writing. And I realized that I was afraid that I couldn't write with toddlers at home, and I had a 1 and a 3-year-old. Yeah. And I had told myself subconsciously so many times, you can't do this right now. You can't do this right now. That I was starting to believe it, even though I saw people doing it. And I knew people in my circle who were doing it with young children at home. I just had told myself, can't do it, can't do it, can't do it, and was believing it. And the fear was coming out of that. So I would say to writers who are struggling with fear or self-doubt or worry about some part of the process is to identify what exactly it is that you're afraid of. It's usually very specific. It's this scene, or it's this book, or things like that, and figure out what lie are you believing that is not that's playing into that fear, that's kind of reinforcing it, so that you are then afraid. Yeah. And replace it with what is true. And I had to start telling myself, I can write with toddlers. I can write with toddlers. It's just going to look different than it did before I had children, of course. Why would I think that it was not going to be different? But for some reason, I had it in my mind that I was going to do it exactly the same way. And of course, that wasn't going to work. So by telling myself, I can do this, it's just going to look different. I can do this, it's just going to look different. I was able to get out of that. And then the next thing you have to do is put a plan in place. What is that saying that says, oh gosh, a goal without a plan is just a dream? Is that the way it goes?
Yeah.
I could have told myself till I was blue in the face, I can do this. But if I didn't have a specific plan to make it happen, it was not going to happen. Yeah. So I determined I was going to write during nap time. I would get an hour and a half every day, and I would write during nap time. So that's it's very like systematic. It's not very feel good, but it totally works for me. Is that you just identify the lie, replace it with the truth, put a plan into place, and that's how I have been able to deal with a lot of the fears, that come along. If you're afraid that you can't write a certain genre, well, then make a plan. Okay, for the next 6 months, I'm going to read books in this genre. I'm going to study them. I'm going to see what's similar about them. If you think that you suck at story structure, probably not. You probably just don't have enough information. That's what I have found a lot of fear comes from. It's a lack of information or a lack of experience.
Yeah.
So I'm going to read 3 books on story structure, and I'm going to be able to break them down. I'm going to learn how it works, and I'm going to set up my next story in following one of those models. We have a really good story structure tool at One Stop that we just implemented about a month ago. But there's so many different ones out there. But that's really what it comes down to is educating yourself.
Yes.
and saying, okay, I'm really scared to do this podcast, but I'm going to ask for the questions up front, and I'm going to prepare, and I'm totally fine.
Yep.
So it's just a matter of planning, of gaining new information, and preparing so that you feel up to the task, and it's a lot easier to face that way.
That's excellent. Well, thanks so much, Becca.
Sure.
Wow.
Absolutely.
So much great information.
Oh,
So listeners, would love to hear about new books or projects that you have on the go right now. Would you talk about kind of what you're up to?
Sure. We have, like I said, the setting books are going to come out in June. If you are interested in those, we don't have a firm date yet because we're still kind of trying to get everything formatted, and we're not sure when it's going to be finished. But we have a newsletter at our blog. Our blog is writershelpingwriters.net. And you can sign up in the sidebar, and it's just to get information on when the books are going to come out. We're putting all that together right now. Super excited about that. And then we have One Stop for Writers, as you've mentioned a number of times, is a separate website that we have. We found that people were working with a lot of our books like open on their desk, where they've got tabs, open on their computer, where they've got the setting thesaurus and the negative trait thesaurus and the emotion thesaurus, and they're trying to go back and forth between all of them. And we thought, wow, we really would like to have a place where it's all together.
Yes.
And the developer of Scrivener for Windows contacted us and said, I'm a writer. I love your books. I would really like to, talk about putting all this together. And we were like, yes, that's what we want. So we created onestopforwriters.com, and it is a subscription site, but you can go and register for free, so you can see the whole thing, a sampling of everything, and see if it's something that you'd like to try out. But it has all of our thesaurus collections there. They're all cross-referenced, and they're all linked, so it's super easy to navigate. And we have a whole bunch of tools there too. We have tools that are on the website, but we also have like I said, a story structure tool. We have new story structure tools coming out that are more geared towards pantsers, a little people who want to have an idea of their structure, but they don't want to go whole hog into the whole thing. They want to be able to innovate a little bit as they go and improvise. We're going to be adding a world building tool down the road for fantasy and science fiction writers. So just lots of different tools that we know as writers ourselves, we really believe would be helpful for writers. So it's all in one spot, and that's onestopforwriters.com.
And where can people find you, like Twitter, Facebook, or on social media?
I use primarily Facebook. So mine is under Rebecca H. Puglisi. If you search for me there, you can find me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Oh, Becca, this has been so good and so helpful.
Good. Oh, I'm so glad.
So you did an excellent job for your first
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm a pro now.
Right on. So, just thanks so much for your time and generosity in sharing all of, the stuff that you've been learning and, books you've been writing. And it's just amazing. I feel like I could talk to you for a couple of days, weeks on this subject. But this is so great.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for doing this. You were a great hostess.
Thank you, Becca.